Hello, you wonderful people, and welcome to another episode of Not Too Comic Book. This being a show where I talk about TV shows that are adaptations of comic books. For today's episode, I'm going to talk about the latest episode of Naomi. A lot of really interesting things went down in this episode, so let's break it down. Well, first and foremost, we are immediately picking up after last episode with Dee revealing his wings to Naomi, and obviously she's having a hard time processing and everything, and on top of that, he clarifies, like, okay, so this is an alien situation that we're dealing with, so we are getting a lot of answers, and it seems like we are going down the route I thought we were. I saw the wings on, once again, DC Universe, feathery, I mean, they're metallic, but they're like feathery wings, and I'm like, I was like, are we going Hawkman? I don't know if he's necessarily Hawkman, but he does say, like, oh, I'm from Vanguard, and I was like, that's the name of the planet, because I couldn't remember the name last episode, but I looked at it, I was like, right, Thanagarians, that's what they are, their species, so I'm like, okay, so whether he could be Hawkman, or it could just be he's from that species. I feel like the go-to, I mean, I don't know, like, other than Hawkman and Hawkgirl, I don't know if there are other well-known Thanagarians in the DC Universe. They're the only ones I'm well-versed in, but even then, I don't know that much about Hawkman and Hawkgirl, except little bits here and there. Once again, I know them from Smallville, obviously, for Arrowverse-wise, I know them from Legends of Tomorrow, obviously, I know them from, like, the animated Justice League series, so that's my limited experience in those characters, so what I thought was interesting, though, is that Dee does reference the Egyptians. Like, he was referencing the Egyptians in something unrelated to all this, but I was like, that's interesting. Like, I wonder, was that supposed to be, like, a slight wink and nod to their other, like, the other, like, Hawkman and Hawkgirl continuity? Like I brought up last episode, their ties to, like, them being Egyptian and that immortality and stuff like that. Which I'm wondering, is that, because, well, Hawkman is going to be, because he's going to be played by Aldous Hodge in the Black Adam movie. So I'm wondering, are they going to lean more towards the alien continuity, or are they going to, especially with, like, magic and stuff like that, I feel like they're probably going to lean more towards the Egyptian angle, maybe? I don't know. I'm curious to see what they end up doing. But I wonder if that D thing was, like, him referencing Egypt was supposed to be, like, a slight wink and nod, and a little bit to their other Egyptian connection. But regardless. So he basically confirms to her that she is an alien, that he is one too. So it's like, right, well, we know where he's from, but even he doesn't have all the answers about who Naomi is. Basically, and I think this is such an interesting thing, that basically because she gives off a frequency, his wings can pick up on a frequency, because humans have a certain frequency, and someone who's not from this world has a different frequency, which is interesting, because, like, it almost feels very Cisco, like, Vibe-esque, because Vibe could, like, sense, like, he could use that. His powers kind of almost worked in a similar sense, like vibrations and frequencies. So it's like, it's interesting, like, that his wings, like, have that element to them. This episode also established, like, this is off the very beaten path to DC. And that, well, I mean, to be fair, I guess Arrow was the same way to some extent. That it's saying that in this continuity, like, oh, like, there haven't been any superheroes in this continuity. Like, Superman, like I brought up, was like, oh, he's a legend. He's kind of like, oh, people don't know if he exists. Once again, Batman, it makes sense. But Superman, it's like, oh, like, the fact is no one thinks he's real. I had brought up last episode, too, about, well, it was like that in Black Lightning as well. Like, when Jeff met multiple Supermans during Crisis on Infinite Earths, he's like, wait, Superman, you're real? Because it's just a rumor on his Earth. So, but I mean, cause we never really got into it, whether there were other real, like, other established superheroes on Jeff's Earth. Prior to him becoming Green Arrow, Oliver thought he was the only, like, he was the first superhero in the universe, when in actuality he's not, because, well, we know, retconning of the continuity, but Bruce was doing the Batman thing long before Oliver became Green Arrow. But once again, Batman was just a rumor. At the time, once again, Batwoman and everything, and the Bat continuity got added after the fact. It's that pseudo addition / retconning. It's just interesting to think about. But it's like, we've been living in such a larger DC universe for a while now, and especially with everything folding into one Earth, for it to be back to, like, square one, where it's like nothing exists. And it's not like, oh, this is in the 40s or something, nothing exists. It's like, no. This is present day and nothing exists. That's why, because you're like, there's no such thing as superhero. I was like, so not even Batman exists in this continuity is what they're saying. It's not saying, like, oh, just here, like, superpower people. It's like, no, superheroes in general don't exist. What's pretty much made it, you kind of had an inkling, like, this probably takes place on another Earth. Once again, so does Stargirl. So like they're probably going to start doing that even more. Like in any future projects won't necessarily take place on Earth Prime. It'll probably be other stuff in the multiverse, just like pretty much everything else DC live action wise is kind of taking place on a different Earth too. But tangents and all that. So I could not let that go the moment they were like, yeah, there's no super. I was like, none? It's like, no wonder you're treating Superman like he's such a myth and a legend, because apparently he is. Which I'm curious, like, is it supposed to be in this continuity? Is it a young... Well, because D references that him and Superman, he's like, I know Superman, he is real. We fought in a war together. I'm like, what war did you fight with Superman? Is that going to be like some wink and nod to some like comic thing of like, oh, like, it most likely is this war or whatever. I'm like, what war did you take place in? Like, was it like had to be like an off-Earth... Like, I mean, it could be some battle that took place partially on Earth, but mainly took place in space or something. I don't know. But like I said, Naomi's having a hard time processing all of this. She even went to ask her parents, like, oh, like, how did my parents die? Crash. You're like, we asked the adoption agency, but they didn't give us really too much information, and we really didn't ask too much at the time. So, like, what you know is what we know. Because at the end of the day, because... Naomi's like, didn't you ever wonder where I was from? It's like, no, you're our daughter, and that's all that matters. This is your home, and this is where you belong. And even her dad being like, yeah, we just wanted to protect you from the world. And it's just interesting at the same time, her dad saying all that. Like, Dee wants to train her up to be prepared. Because she's like, you've known for a while. Why didn't you come to me at any point in time and tell me the truth? And he's like, your powers never developed. You seem like you were happy and living a normal life, and like this disrupts a life. And like I never didn't want that for you. Like if you didn't display any abilities, then why like put you through that? I was hoping you'd just be able to live a normal life and everything would be okay. But sadly, things changed and shifted. I wonder what caused it. Is it just being around Superman, whatever it is that Superman was fighting at the time, like maybe being around another... Well, because she's been around D before, but he's never flexed his powers, so maybe being around another alien who uses their powers as well, caused a shift and stir inside of her. Like, once again, maybe it's not just in response. Maybe it's just like all these aliens being in the same spot triggered something. Like, the person Superman was fighting, Superman himself, Zambado, and D, like, all that became too much and it overloaded her system. But, yeah, like, I do like that the fact is she takes it with a grain of salt. Not because it's just she needed a rational explanation for it, because she's like, no, aliens don't exist. She's like, she kept being like, oh, your wings, it had to be this. It's like, she kept trying to find excuses. And she even explains it later on. She tried to rationalize everything, because if she could find a logical explanation for everything, then it means that she didn't have to be like, she could prove that everything that D was saying was a lie, that she isn't some alien, that she's human. And I thought that was interesting how she really got into it later on with Annabelle, because it's like, right, I've moved everywhere. I've always been like, because of my dad's job, I always moved around, always had to be the odd one out. Like, you know, whether it's just like because she's into what she's into, or, you know, being a military kid, being adopted, being the only black kid at like her school or whatever. It's like she's always been the odd one out, and now she found a place where it's just like, no, I get to just be me. But even Annabelle's like, you were never just normal. You've always been exceptional, and that's, you know, that's not my bias. That's a fact. But it's like, yeah, like, because the moment she ended up telling Annabelle about it later on, she was like, wait, what? That's so dope. That's sick. That's awesome. Because she was like, I'm speechless. Because she's like, that's never happened to me before that I've ever been speechless. But come on, you're a superhero. Like, wait, why are you like trying so hard to prove that you're not a superhero? Like, she was all about, because she trusts Naomi. She knows Naomi wouldn't like come up like, so if this is the case, then that means like, well, things have been weird in town. So if like you're telling me like this, I'm gonna believe you. Like I said, pretty interesting how that all got handled, especially because for Naomi, it kind of sunk in more when they were out there checking stuff out in the woods. Which I love that at one point Annabelle was licking something off a tree. Like, no. She was almost like, I don't know if that was supposed to be sap or something. I'm like, don't lick random stuff off trees. What are you doing? But Naomi started hearing everything. She was like smiling because at first she was like, oh, hearing Jacob and Annabelle's conversation, and she turns around and they're nowhere near her. So I'm like, okay, so she has like enhanced perception is kind of what I was thinking last episode. Like, it seems like obviously without her glasses, like she has not super sight, but like enhanced vision. She also has enhanced super hearing, but there's also like other abilities. I'm like, are you like a bender, like an avatar, like Avatar: The Last Bender, or like Legend of Korra? Like, are you an element bender? Like, what can you do fully, or is it more like to manipulate? Like, are you like on a scientific level? Are you like manipulating like the particles or something like that to make stuff happen? Like, I'm curious, like, what's the actual explanation, and like, what, I mean, I'm sure I could look it up, because I'm sure there's a Wikipedia page like this is what her abilities are, and kind of, it's like, but I'm gonna wait for the show to actually explain, because I'm trying to understand what she can actually fully do. Like, we've seen her like summon stuff up around her, like kind of, that's what it almost feels like airbending. But that's why I'm like wondering, is it like an elemental thing? Because it seems like we might be dealing with, like, especially with what the show seems to be, I'm like, is it going to end up being like what the imagery they've used for the show and what we've seen bits and pieces here and stuff in the promo? I'm like, is it going to be like light? Is that what her power is going to be? Like, is it, or like, as Dee referenced the frequencies and stuff, like, does she manipulate the frequencies of things and is able to kind of control them? Like, I'm curious how that all operates. But I love that Annabelle's boyfriend Jacob like rolled up in that like a very old car, like ready to die. He's like, no, don't talk about her like that. She's very sensitive. But yeah, they went to investigate things, and then Anthony got dragged into it. Well, because initially Jacob was like, "Oh, Anthony told me you guys want to date." She's like, "No, we're not going to date. We're eating pizza." It's like, "Oh, yikes!" She totally didn't read the situation the way Anthony read it. I even love they had that moment in the dark room, and then Jacob like kind of butts in. I'm like, that's kind of messed up. And then Annabelle gets in the middle of that too. I'm like, now it's two people in between you and Naomi. But basically, there was a dude named years ago, Steve, who was about a junior at that time in high school, who was all about aliens and stuff like that, UFOs and stuff. But he had an experience, and it scared him away from it to the point he doesn't talk about it anymore. And I love that explanation, and I think, you know, Naomi took something from that conversation. You could tell she found a little bit of a kindred spirit there, in that he wanted to put all that UFO stuff behind, because it's like, right, he didn't want to be the oddball kid anymore. He wanted to fit in, he wanted to be normal, and she could understand that, so she needed answers. So he went to him, like, he saw the light that day back then, because Naomi was wondering, like, maybe it has something to, well, because they did say she was in a different area. I don't think the crash, I thought the crash was supposed to be her, which it still could have been, like, you know, very Superman-esque. But I think when they talk about her being found somewhere else, she really was in a different place. Like, she crashed somewhere else, and this crash was something else. I wonder, is it like Zimbardo? Like, was that actually him crashing all those years ago? Or maybe it is Naomi, and I'm just like completely misunderstanding that. Do clarify that for me in the comments down below, because I'm kind of confused on what that kind of was. But it turns out Naomi and them were looking in the wrong spot the entire time. Obviously, like, this has become so important to her, because like Nathan and Jacob thought like this was just for fun. They didn't think there was anything serious to this. But Annabelle's the only one who knows the truth of what Naomi's dealing with, like, right, finding out she's an alien, and why this is so important to her. But I love that aspect, that conversation. I love that line of, you know, what was it, like, give me the clarity to know the things I can't change, the courage for the things that I can change, and the wisdom to know the difference. I've always loved that. Like, I never, like, get the quote right, but I've always, when I hear it, I'm like, oh, I love that line. It's so, that quote is so good. But it's like, right, there's just certain things that you can't change, but maybe by stop running from it, by accepting it, it makes it a little less scary, you know? Because once you're able to kind of control it, it no longer becomes this foreign thing anymore. It's like, no, this is me, this is a part of me, and it's about learning to accept every aspect of herself. So, which Nathan shows up to later on, and you're like, okay, this is complicated and awkward, because Nathan's like, why are you here? And then Anthony's like, why are you here? And she's like, why are you here? Nathan's like, we had plans, working on a project. Then I show up, like, you never got back in contact with me, you completely forgot about it, and also suddenly there's all those people here. He's like, I kind of feel like, yeah, we're not dating, but we're still friends. And it's like, oh, that's awkward. And he's kind of getting filled in a little bit. Like, Annabelle's like, don't worry about it. I'll fill you in about everything later. Because they end up finding the mill that Steve had talked about. Him and his friends had went to years ago. Because before they even really got too close, like, the light happened and he was back in his car. So, like, their memories were jumbled or messed with. To some extent, because he was like, I don't know how I got back in my car, and that's all there is. That's why he doesn't want to talk about it. Sounds like a pretty, like, crazy experience that you're like, right, if I talk about it, I'm just going to sound nuts, so I'm not going to talk about it. They go out there. Obviously, there's an awkward thing between, it's like, yeah, there's Naomi in the middle of Nathan and Anthony, and even Jacob and Annabelle joking about how the car is super crowded now. The car breaks down. They call Lourdes, and she shows up. And then you have that moment where, like, Anthony and Nathan, like, look at each other, because it's like, yeah, they have issues with each other because they both like Naomi. But then there's also, like, cool, there's a third person in this. Because it's not even a love triangle. It's a love square. So that's complicated. But they end up finding the mill where Steve and them were heading, and they find all these symbols on the wall, which Naomi recognizes them from the disc. So what's that's all about? Zimbardo shows up knowing someone broke into his place. Police are asking questions. Like, now I'm trying to decide, what do I say to them? I don't know what his circumstances is. I don't know what. I'm curious to find out whether Zimbardo is like a full-blown villain or not, or whether he's kind of tiptoeing. Like, he might be kind of like Damon at the beginning of Vampire Diaries. He was kind of antagonistic, but truth be told is he was just some dude trying to get back Catherine, like the woman he loved. He just wanted to get her back. He wanted to find, like, that's all that was. That was kind of, but he was a villain to some extent. So I'm wondering if, like, Zimbardo's like that too. Like, he's looking for something, and he's pushing Naomi because he doesn't want her involved because this is his thing. It's like, right, because she's like, right, she was asking about things, and he was like, that doesn't have any concern of yours. I'm assuming, like I said, it's about him. Some of the stuff that's going on is about him and not her. But we also got a little display of what he can do. It seemed like he basically sent an energy ball towards her. Like, all he did was kind of blow super hard. So I don't know. Like, that's why I'm curious. Like, is there some... Maybe his is more energy based, or maybe hers is too. Like, not unless we find out, like, her thing is like ultraviolet, like rays and stuff like that. Like I said, frequencies and stuff like that. She's able to control, and maybe he can actually full blown control energy. Don't know. He was able to kind of send her back. I thought it was interesting. It was like, oh, you guys don't have to get involved. You can all leave, but Naomi stays. And Naomi's like, right, if I stay here, will you let them go? And it's like, which they're hesitant to do it, but she's like, no, like Zeus, remember? And Annabelle's like, all right, and agreed to leave her behind. Obviously, like, but Zimbardo's like, need to not actually hurt her. The fact is, that's why I'm like, I don't think you're the bad guy, because if it was a thing of like, oh, you're this new... I mean, granted, if he killed her, it'd draw too much attention, but it might also be like he needs her in the end, because the thing is, D hasn't really pushed that, like he's like, oh, like, I need to prepare you for like what's to come, now that your world, like your view's been open, like other people are going to be aware of you too, but he never specifically called out Zimbardo, so it's like, whatever that is, it's such a separate thing that, like, D knows he's after something, but it's like, I don't think he's like, you need to be able to defend yourself, but he hasn't outwardly said, like, he's the threat, or at least he is a threat you should be aware of. It's just like, he's just saying there's going to be other threats in general that she has to be prepared for, so. Because Zimbardo ended up going to that wall, and he ended up holding out his hand, so I don't know if that was power, or maybe it's just like, maybe because he had that disc or whatever, or came in contact with it, maybe it acted as kind of like a cipher key, and he was able to kind of unlock that door now that he actually had, like, essentially the password to it. So maybe that's what that was, because all of a sudden the writing on the wall just disappeared. So, like, I guess it's like a secret passage. I don't know if it's like some secret passageway, but why was it sealed up like that? Or was that him, like, is the thing he found last episode, is that, like, the lock and all that stuff written on the wall is to cipher the key to open it, and he's absorbing it just to go back and open the thing? A lot of speculation on my part. But obviously Naomi's kind of like put the kibosh on like the whole Anthony thing for now. She's like, no, I'm not saying like it'll never happen, but there's a lot going on now, so like maybe someday. And he's like, no, I can accept that for now. But so that's going to be interesting. But after it's all said and done, she goes to see D, and it's like, yeah, she kind of finally accepts things. Like, granted, she was able to use her power, but she couldn't actually attack with it. So D's going to be kind of training her. And he's like, yeah, it feels good to be able to use your power and be able to control it. Because obviously she's scared and nervous, but also very excited because it's kind of opened up her worldview. Because it also gives her, like, she's had questions about herself in the past, I'm sure, and she's talked about it a little bit. But now it's like there's even more to yourself. There's so much, and she's all about, she's young and she's all about new discoveries, and this is something you're not only discovering about yourself but the universe as a whole. You're even asking like, oh, could you introduce me to Superman? He's like, yeah, sure, one day. So, but other than that, her dad has been tasked with he's basically part of like a secret government organization. Was it PTF, if I remember correctly? Basically, it's a government organization that basically investigates aliens, because they looked into the whole D thing. Like, he, claimed to be the one responsible for the Superman thing, but when they dug into it deeper, especially because Naomi's dad was sent to investigate it more, he calls the person that D was like, yeah, this is the actor I hired to do it, but it's like, no, it's all dead ends. So obviously, like, is he a bad guy? Is he a threat? Who knows? But he's definitely hiding something. Now, is he being 100% honest with Naomi? Is it going to be one of those things of like, right, I'm trying to tell you things in time. Like, I'm only telling you enough that you're able to process for now. I'm not telling you everything. But it might be he's being as honest as possible, because maybe he does. That's why I brought up before, like, it almost felt like he can't lie, but I was like, no, maybe he can. Because last episode I made the reference to like the Aes Sedai from Wheel of Time. Like, they can stretch the truth, but they can't outwardly full-blown lie. They can dance around it. So I was wondering if maybe that was his circumstances, but it doesn't seem like that's the case. But it seems like it could be he is being as honest as possible, because there is just so little he does know about Naomi's circumstances. What species of alien she is, where she's from, why she's here. The question is, like, why is he here? Why are a lot of aliens here? Like, are all the aliens here on this planet like Superman? Are they the last of their species? Like, is Naomi the last? Or were there other extenuating circumstances why she's here? Same thing for D. But obviously now, because also, when they were investigating this Superman, like, stunt, they found what I'm assuming it's red cloth. I'm like, oh, that must be part of his cape. And they're like, no matter what we do, we nuke it, we burn it. Like, nothing we do works on this material. We have no idea what it is. So it's like, well, it makes sense considering all the things Superman has to go up against. He's got to make sure his costume is resistant to all the baddies that he ends up having to fight. But Naomi's dad's got dragged into this even deeper, knowing like, right, there are aliens here, and it's up to us to determine why they're here, whether they're a threat. Sadly, not even knowing that. So I was wondering whether the like her parents knew. Maybe it could still end up being the case, but I think they are actually ignorant to like what she really is. I don't think I guess the look on her dad's face was just kind of like concerned because she's asking a whole bunch of questions, but also like, does he I would assume if he knew, his wife would know too. So I'm like, do they actually know? Or is it just kind of like him being concerned because she's asking all these questions, and, it's like, right, she's going to be out, he had said, like, I want to protect you from the world, but sadly you can't protect her from everything. So maybe that's what that just was concerned as a parent. Or maybe there was there's just so much we don't know. Because every time we're getting like one or two answers, we're just getting that many more questions stacked on top of it. So I'm so excited to see where ultimately all of this takes us going forward into the next episode. Like I said, I'm really enjoying the fact that this is heavily like starting off as a big mystery and figuring everything out. So we'll see where it takes us. But really, that's all I'm going to talk about. Till the next time we meet, be happy, be safe, live life to the fullest, and enjoy it. Good day, and Goodbye.